The National Alliance for Christian Leadership is an alliance of Christian organisations right across the church spectrum. In other words, we're bringing Christian leaders together. It's basically an educational and political alliance. We got basically involved in this because what we could see happening in the creationist area was legislation against free thought. And we were very much involved in fighting the ID cards and what we call the human rights law, or should I say the human rights law. And we've been we now have committees set up for the what we regard as the Unconstitutional Commission. So that's basically where we're coming from. So we have very much a stake in this particular area, creation science, because we do monitor a lot of literature. We know, for instance, that basically the thrust is not just against creation, but against Christianity per se. So I've made an announcement. I'll just pass over to Barry. This is Barry Williams, who's the current president of the Australian Skeptics.
Thank you, John. Australian Skeptics is a non-political, non-religious organisation to investigate claims of paranormal and pseudoscience. In the case of creationism, the reason why we're here tonight, we regard it as just as much a pseudoscience as we regard astrology or New Age phenomena, trans-channeling. We feel that there is no evidence whatsoever to indicate that it has any scientific validity, and we defend that case. We produced a book on the topic, which is available in the foyer, if I hold it up the right way. And we also produce quarterly a magazine called The Skeptic, in which we cover a multitude of topics, one of which is creationism. Australian Skeptics will be holding their 4th annual convention at the Manly Green Beliefs Club on Easter Saturday and Sunday. You will see the poster outside describing that. If you want any more details, you can see our people afterwards. I hope it'll be a fun debate tonight, and thank you all for coming.
We have two distinguished speakers, and very briefly, your first speaker is Duane Gish. Now, Dr. Gish received his bachelor's degree in chemistry from the University of California in 1949. He has a doctorate in biochemistry in 1953 from the same university of Berkeley. That's got 2 different campuses. Anyway, he spent 18 years in biochemical research, several institutions, including, I'm reading this, including Cornell University Medical College, the Virus Laboratory at the University of California, Berkeley, the Upjohn Company, I think he has an American accent, a pharmaceutical firm in Kalamazoo, Michigan. During that time, he worked with 2 Nobel Prize winners. He's the co-author of over 30 technical papers. He has authored several books and numerous papers on the subject which we're about to hear, creation and evolution. He's lectured and debated on this subject at major university campuses, it doesn't say why, throughout the United States and over 25 foreign countries. He's a fellow of the American Institute of Chemists and is a member of the American Chemical Society. I don't know what that is either. And the American Association for the Advancement of Science. He is listed in the American Men of Science and Who's Who of the West. The second speaker is Mr. Plimer, BSc Honours, PhD. It's a bit shorter. He's worked at 4 different universities. He will speak secondly. And he's worked also in the mining industry. He's currently Professor and Head of the Department of Geology, University of Newcastle. So I think he speaks with Darren. Anyway, the question is, which is the pseudoscience, creation or evolution? And they're both theories according to the question. So each speaker will speak for 50 minutes on that, and then we'll have a break. So it's an hour and 40 minutes. An hour and 40 minutes. There'll be no break in between the speakers, so please, once Dr. Gish has finished speaking, we'll go straight on with Dr. Plimer. So if you'll get a chance to break when Dr. Plimer's finished, sorry. After the break, there'll be a response by each member, and he will speak for 15 minutes each. and then there'll be a brief summary by each of them for another 5 minutes, after which we'll get a chance to ask some questions. And we don't want any questions which are statements. We want nice brief questions, you know, because you'll be cut off if you try to make statements that, you know, you believe in God or something. We won't have it. Must be a genuine which question. Not now. And we'll have to wait. And apparently, if the questions are asked, we've got a microphone, so you'll all get a chance. But anyway, we're running a little bit late, so...
Thank you very much, Dr. Plimer, and ladies and gentlemen. It certainly is a privilege for me to be here at the University of New South Wales and have the opportunity tonight to present for your consideration some of the results of my research on the subject of origins. Now, of course, we recognize that this is a controversial subject, but really we've come here tonight to generate light and not heat. Of course, one of the byproducts of generating light is some heat, but we trust that this discussion will be congenial. We trust that Dr. Plimer and I can agree to disagree and still part friends tonight. What we are here for is to inform. And so we trust that as you leave this evening, you will have been informed, you'll find it interesting, and perhaps you will have gained a new perspective on the subject of origins. Now, I want to say, first of all, what is not being debated here this evening. We're not debating the age of the earth. We're not debating the biblical record of creation. We're not debating any biblical interpretation or theology. We're here to debate this question of creation versus evolution. What is the most credible, reasonable, scientific explanation for origins, creation or evolution? That's the real subject of the debate. How did the universe and living organisms come into being? Did they come into being by a naturalistic, mechanistic, evolutionary process due to properties inherent in matter, or by the deliberate, planned, creative acts of a creator who is external to and independent of the natural universe? That's the basic question that we are debating here this evening. Now, these do involve, of course, our personal world views, and that's true not only of the creationists but also of the evolutionists. Richard Lewontin, professor of genetics at Harvard University, an evolutionist and whose standard secular views needs no defense, he stated in the introduction to Scientists Confront Creationism, published in 1983, that there is a fundamental contradiction between evolution and creationism. They are irreconcilable worldviews. End of quote. I agree with that. Now, if evolution is a worldview and creation is a worldview, they're equally religious, you see. They involve our personal view of the universe and reality. Must we explain origins in naturalistic, mechanistic terms, or is there a possibility that there is a God who's a creator? The origin could have been theistic and supernatural, you see. That is not a bit unscientific. Science is our attempt to observe, to understand and explain the operation of the universe and the operation of living things. It's our attempt to explain the here and now. Now, when we step beyond the limits of empirical science and try to explain the origin of the universe and the origin of life, you see we're outside of the proper limits of science. You see, there were no human witnesses of the origin of the universe there were no human witnesses to the origin of life. As a matter of fact, there were no human witnesses to the origin of a single living thing. Those were unique events. They only happened once in the unobservable past, and you cannot repeat those events today. You cannot test the theory on how fish may have evolved into an amphibian or ape into man. You cannot test the theory on how the universe may have evolved. Those are untestable theories and supernatural. Now, what predictions would we make? You know, you weren't there. I wasn't there. Dr. Plimer wasn't there. We can have any witnesses, and how can we know? Well, we have the products, you see, either of creation or evolution. And there's certainly going to be a difference between these products if we were created or if we evolved. Furthermore, the evolutionist says that evolution has occurred by natural processes still occurring today. Therefore, there must not be any contradiction between the laws of science, natural processes, and the theory of evolution. So let's look at some of these natural processes. Let's look at the science of thermodynamics. Now, if we all come from hydrogen gas, then I think you would agree that matter must have an inherent tendency, an intrinsic ability to transform itself from disorder to order, from simple to complex. And scientists should have constructed a natural law which describes such a natural tendency of matter. On the other hand, if creation is true, we would not predict that matter would have this intrinsic ability to promote itself to higher and higher levels of organization. But if anything has happened since creation to change the initial created state, this could only promote matter downward, couldn't promote it upward. Therefore, on the basis of creation, we might expect that matter would have a natural tendency to go from order to disorder, from the complex to the simple. Now, you see, evolution says this way, creation says that way. Now let's go out in the real world and let's just take a look. Let's see what's going on out there. Well, first of all, let me point out, no scientist has ever recognized an inherent tendency of matter to promote itself from disorder to order, from simple to complex. That's not known. That's not the way things go in nature. But they always have a tendency to go in the opposite direction, from order to disorder, from complex to simple. As a matter of fact, this tendency is so universal, so unfading, it's been formalized as the second law of thermodynamics. Now, the second law of thermodynamics says many things. But one thing it does say is that there is this natural tendency, all systems, whether we're talking about clusters of galaxies or stars, our bodies, our houses, machines, whatever, there all is this natural tendency to go downward, to deteriorate and to decay. And it's a natural law. Everything obeys that law. Open and closed systems, it doesn't make a difference. There's always the tendency to go in that direction. Now, I'm going to allow Isaac Asimov to state this for us. I had a debate with Isaac Asimov in the pages of Science Digest, October 1981. We were each allowed to write an initial argument. The editor exchanged these arguments, and then we wrote a rebuttal. And in my initial argument, I quoted the following statement by Dr. Asimov and challenged him to explain how evolution could take place in the light of the facts, as he so stated. Now, maybe we have that first slide. You want to turn on? Now, we need to dim the lights, and it's going to take just a little bit of time to get the lights turned down. Now, I'll read this for you, because I doubt if many of you can read it anyhow. Now, this was published by Isaac Asimov in the Smithsonian Institute Journal, June of 1970, on page 6. He says, and I quote, "Another way of stating the second law, then, is the universe is constantly getting more disorderly. Viewed that way, we can see the second law all about us. We have to work hard to straighten a room, but left to itself it becomes a mess again, very quickly and very easily. Even if we never enter it, it becomes dusty and musty. How difficult to maintain houses and machinery and our own bodies in perfect working order. How easy to let them deteriorate. In fact, all we have to do is nothing. and everything deteriorates, collapses, breaks down, wears out, all by itself. And that is what the second law is all about. End of quote. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it seems to me that if that is what the second law of thermodynamics is all about, the theory of evolution is in serious trouble. You see, there is this universal natural tendency for everything to go downward, to decay. Now, this second law of thermodynamics always applies to an isolated system, without exception. An isolated system is a system in which no work is being performed by anybody on the outside. It's a system into which nothing is being brought in from the outside. It's an isolated system. Everything that takes place within that system is a process of self-transformation. The second law says, without exception, that system will deteriorate, will become more random, less complex and ordered. It will never, ever, ever become more complex, more highly structured, and more ordered. Never. And yet evolutionists believe that the universe is an isolated system that started in a state of primordial chaos and disorder and simplicity and has transformed itself into this highly complex universe we have today, including the millions of living organisms on the surface. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a clear violation of the second law of thermodynamics. And nobody needs to stand up and start talking about open and closed systems. Because the universe, in the evolutionary view, is a closed system. It's an isolated system. The second law does apply to that. The universe simply could not have created itself. Creation science, they decided the universe has created itself, is pseudoscience. That's not science. That's a violation of the laws of science. And if we're going to be scientists, we're going to say we're going to explain everything in the light of natural laws, then we ought to discard that theory because it violates that natural law. Now, furthermore, the whole universe is running down. You know, all the stars are burning up their fuel. Someday they're all going to be dead and cold, you see. That is, if there is no God. Or if God would not intervene, this universe is certain to die. Because inevitably, someday, all those stars will be dark and cold. The universe will assume one even temperature, no further exchange of energy, no life, no activity. The universe will still be here, but it'll be dead. Now, this is the question, which I have challenged evolutionists time and time again. I've never received a rational answer. If the natural laws and natural processes which now govern the universe are leading inexorably to its death and destruction, and if, as evolutionists believe, these natural laws and natural processes are all there is and all there ever has been, how could those very same natural laws create the universe in the first place? Is it possible that the very processes which are now destroying the universe could have been responsible for its origin? What sort of tortured logic would one have to use to reach such an impossible conclusion? Creation scientists reject that notion as being irrational, unscientific, and simply pseudoscientific. It has no relevance to anything related to origins. And so the science of thermodynamics certainly demonstrates the universe could not have created itself. Now, what about the complexity, the order that we find in the universe? Could that come about by chance? Is it possible? Well, there are ways of calculating those factors. Let's take a look here now at the next slide. Here is the structure of an enzyme. This is ribonuclease. It has 124 amino acids in it. It's a protein, of course. All enzymes are proteins. Both enzymes, of course, are those catalysts which make chemical reactions go very rapidly, which ordinarily go slowly. And life could never exist without enzymes. The most primitive form of life imaginable would have to have hundreds of different kinds of enzymes, hundreds of DNA and RNA molecules, which are even more complex, and many other complex molecules. Now, we see in this enzyme 124 amino acids. That's a rather small protein. The average protein has 400 amino acids. Some have over 2,000 amino acids. But in this protein, we see lysine is number 1, glutamic acid is number 2, then threonine, alanine, lysine, phenylalanine, glutamic acid, arginine, glutamine, histamine, and so forth. 124 amino acids arranged in precise order. Now you can do some juggling around, but not much. It's fairly precise. Now when you have those 20 amino acids arranged in that order, you have this enzyme. When you have 287 of those same 20 amino acids arranged in a different order in two chains, you have hemoglobin. Or rearrange them in a different order, 188 of them, and you have human growth hormone. One's a hormone, one binds oxygen, one's an enzyme. But they perform biological function with tremendous preciseness and ability. How can we account for that precise order? The evolutionist says, just by chance. It just happened. That's all. You see, there is no selection. Amino acid doesn't select one over the other. Believe me, I worked with those for many, many years in the laboratory, synthesizing proteins, and it is hard work. It just does not happen naturally. They don't select. There's nothing like that. There's nothing delivered or preordained. So it's purely by chance. What is the probability we're going to get 124 amino acids arranged in that order? 1 over 20 times itself 124 times. Believe me, ladies and gentlemen, that is the probability absolutely zero. If you could try that 1 trillion times every second for 20 billion years, every second for 20 billion years, there wouldn't be the remotest probability you'd end up with that structure there. Now, let me take something more simple. If I'd have 17 people to line up here in front of the auditorium in a certain order and then reshuffle in a different order and then keep doing that over and over again, lining up time and time again, but never lining up twice in the same order. How many times could 17 people line up? You wouldn't believe it. More than 355 trillion different times. 355 million different ways. Well, you don't believe it. All right, you get 16 of your friends together after the meeting and you try. Well, this universe will be gone before you ever finish trying. Believe me, that's only 17. We have 124 here. And what if it did happen? What would you have? One single molecule of one single protein. But you've got to have billions of tons each of hundreds of different kinds of protein molecules. You've got to have billions of tons each of hundreds of DNA and RNA molecules, and many more. And ladies and gentlemen, that wouldn't produce a living cell anyhow. Remember the second law of thermodynamics? Would these molecules spontaneously organize themselves into more complex systems? Why, of course not. If you have a complex system, they will deteriorate and break down and decay, you see. But we've got to have a very complex system. We've got to have a membrane, very complex. We've got to have energy factors, protein factors. We've got to have the genetic material, and it must be put together in just a particular fashion. Life is not a bag of chemicals. Those elements are arranged in precise fashion. Would that ever happen on this earth through the ordinary processes of chemistry and physics? Absolutely not. Anybody who believes that has tremendous religious faith. That's all I can say. And it is irrational faith, and it's a pseudo-scientific faith. Here's a newspaper article that appeared in the Daily Express of London, August 14, 1981. Two skeptical scientists put their heads together and reached an amazing conclusion. There must be a God. Who were these two scientists? Sir Fred Hoyle, the British astronomer, one of the world's leading astronomers, and his friend and colleague, Professor Chandra Wickramasinghe, professor and chairman of the Department of Applied Mathematics and Astronomy, University College in Cardiff, Wales, also a very well-known astronomer. These two scientists became interested in the problem of origin of life a few years ago. They were both atheists at that time, so they had absolutely no inclination to lean toward the creationist point of view. But they calculated the probability of life evolving on this planet in 5 billion years. The probability, 1 chance out of 10 to the 40,000th power. That's 1 out of the number 1 followed by 40,000 zeros. I assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that's just flatly zero. But they said, after all, there's 100 billion galaxies in the universe. Each galaxy has 100 billion stars. Let us assume that every star in the universe has a planet like the Earth. Let us assume the universe is 20 billion years old. Now let us calculate the probability of life evolving somewhere in the universe in that 20 billion years. The answer? Forget about it. The probability was so low, it was essentially nil or zero. Sir Fred Hoyle said the probability of evolution is equal to the probability that a tornado sweeping through a junkyard would assemble a Boeing 747. Now I tell people, if you want to believe that, that's okay, but let's just don't call it science. You see, there's a tremendous religious faith, and it's a religious faith that is irrational and certainly pseudoscientific. These scientists did not become creationists. By the way, they're not Christians. They don't believe in the Bible or anything like that. But they do believe that wherever life exists in this universe, it had to be created. Did they become creationists because of their religion? Obviously not. They became creationists in spite of their religion, because they were both atheists when they began these studies. Professor Rick Ramassing said he didn't feel very comfortable with this notion, but he could find no logical way out of it. Now, these scientists were open-minded. They were willing to accept the decision dictated by the scientific data, and they agreed with what we had been saying all along. Now, let's take a look at the record of the past, the fossil record. Now, if evolution is true, of course, we should have thousands, tens of thousands, undoubted transition forms in our museum. There should be no quarrel about it. There should be no dispute. I wouldn't be here tonight. We would have the absolute proof of evolution into tens of thousands of undoubted intermediate forms or partway forms. We have 250,000 fossil species in our museum, represented by tens of millions of fossils. No one can plead the poverty of the fossil record. We have an immeasurably rich fossil record. If evolution is true, tens of thousands of those creatures should be of intermediate form. On the other hand, if creation is true, we would expect to predict that fossils of each basic type of plant and animal, which we could call a created kind or basic morphological design, they would appear fully formed right at the start. An onion would be an onion, a rose would be a rose, tigers would be tigers, fish would be fish, people would be people, if creation is true. Now we see the predictions are very different. Well, let's take a look at that fossil record. May I first of all cite a British zoologist, Dr. Mark Ridley, a most decided evolutionist, in New Scientist, volume 90, 25th of June 1981, on page 830. There's an article by Mark Ridley. Now, he wants to downgrade the fossil record. He wants to downplay the fossil record because he knows it's in terrible shape as far as evolution is concerned. As a matter of fact, this is what he says. No real evolutionist, whether gradualist or punctuationist, uses the fossil record as evidence in favor of the theory of evolution as opposed to specialist creation. End of quote. So he says no real evolutionists even try to use the fossil record to defend evolution. Now, I don't know whether Dr. Plimer is going to do that tonight, but I've heard many evolutionists try to do that. According to Dr. Ridley, they're not a real evolutionist if they do such a thing, you see. Why does he say that? What better proof of evolution could you have than a fossil record if evolution is true? Now, others have attacked the fossil record. Dr. Colin Patterson, senior paleontologist at the British Museum of Natural History, he's an evolutionist, not a creationist, but he's made some rather astounding statements in the last few years. This was taken from an interview on BBC Radio, published in The Listener, 8th of October 1981, on page 390. That's the publication of the British Broadcasting Corporation. Now, in this article, he is quoted as saying that all we have of these evolutionary phylogenetic trees are the tips of the branches. All the rest is just storytelling of one kind or another. Now, I imagine we're going to hear some storytelling tonight. But Dr. Patterson said it is nothing but storytelling. We just have the tips of the branches. We have the terminal forms. He also says this, that the history of life is still fiction rather than fact, and the Darwinian penchant for explaining evolution in terms of adaptation and selection is largely empty rhetoric. End of quote. Then he goes on to say, just as pre-Darwinian biology was carried out by people whose faith was in the Creator and His plan, post-Darwinian biology is being carried out by people whose faith is in almost the deity of Darwin. Now that's by an evolutionist. That's by a paleontologist sitting among millions and millions of fossils. And he stated in a letter that He had not included any examples of transition forms in his book on evolution because he said he didn't know of any, either among the fossils or among the living. Well, let's take a look at some major aspects of the fossil record. Now here we see a reconstruction of animals and fossils that have been found in Cambrian rocks. It is believed by evolutionary geologists that these rocks began to form 600 million years ago and formed during a period of 80 million years. I don't have the foggiest notion how you get fossils under those conditions. You have to have a catastrophic sudden burial to get fossils. Here we have billions times billions of fossils of these creatures. Seems to me to speak certainly of catastrophe on a mammoth scale. But however they formed, we have a great variety of complex invertebrates in these Cambrian rocks. We have jellyfish, we have sponges, we have sea urchins, we have that swimming crustacean Cytneal, trilobites, we have the sea lily, we have clams, snails, brachiopods, worms, and a tremendous variety of very highly complex invertebrates. Evolutionists say these creatures came from a little microscopic single-cell organism, something like a bacterium or algae or amoeba or something like that, during hundreds of millions of years of time. Now, there's been many reports of the discovery of little microscopic bacteria and algae in the fossil record. Now, if you can find fossils with little microscopic, soft-bodied, single-cell organisms, you certainly can find fossils of everything in between. Ladies and gentlemen, we do not have a single ancestor for one of these creatures, not for one of them. There are no ancestors for trilobites. The first trilobite was a trilobite complete. There are no ancestors for sponges, there's no ancestors for jellyfish, there's no ancestors for a single one of those creatures, not one. We have a tremendous explosion of these creatures. I'm aware of the Ediacaran fauna found here in Australia and other places around the world. They were very complex creatures, soft-bodied, complex creatures, and they could not possibly be the ancestors of the Cambrian animal because they are very, very different. According to Silacker, a German paleontologist, Stephen J. Gould, and others, they could absolutely not be ancestors of the Cambrian animal. Ladies and gentlemen, as far as I'm concerned, that settles the question. Evolution has not occurred. As far as the scientific evidence is concerned, as far as the hard facts of science are concerned, every one of these creatures has appeared fully formed. Now, ultimately, the vertebrates supposedly evolved from the invertebrates, and these invertebrates have no ancestors, so we have no ancestors. Now, furthermore, one of these creatures supposedly evolved into a fish, the first vertebrate. Suppose they are vertebrates, internal skeletons, in contrast to these invertebrates. Evolution says it took 100 million years for an invertebrate to evolve into a fish, while we have billions times billions of those things that have lived and died during that 100 million years. Our museums should have millions upon millions of their fossils. They don't have one. Not even one single fossil of an intermediate between an invertebrate and a vertebrate. The ichthyologists say that every major kind of fish that we know anything about appeared fully formed right at the start. They have their origins firmly based in nothing. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that's the fact. Now, you can believe anything you want to. By faith, you can believe a fish evolved from one of those invertebrates, but you don't have one iota of evidence for it. And ladies and gentlemen, you cannot have 100 million years of evolution and not leave a trace. We ought to have billions of those things, billions times billions, and we don't even have one. Ladies and gentlemen, vertebrates do not have ancestors. We are vertebrates, so we don't have ancestors. Now, you see, that just simply settles the question. Why should we argue about Archaeopteryx? Why should we argue about Australopithecus? The evolutionists themselves argue about that. Here are gaps that are absolutely immense. There's no question about it. There's no dispute. No evolutionist in his right mind would question the statement that there are no ancestors for fishes. And that settles the question. But we could deal with much more of the fossil record. The fact is, I want to prove my point using the evolutionary literature itself. I have an illustration here taken from this book, Confronting Creationism, Defending Darwin, published right here in New South Wales. That book quotes or cites Michael Archer and Clayton, one of their books, as evidence for transition forms among the elephants. And here is the illustration. And they say that this is fossil record of the elephant. Solid vertical lines represent fossil record. Dashed lines, the dashed lines represent phylogenetic interpretations about probable origins of the species. Notice, please notice, ladies and gentlemen, that here are the solid lines, right here. Those are the solid lines. Those are where we have actual fossil remains. What do we have? Parallel existence of these creatures. Notice the transitional form. What do they have? Dotted lines. At every point they have dotted lines. What does that mean? No transitional form. No fossils. Here, from their own mouth, out of their own book, they have proven that they don't have the transition form. They've shot themselves in the foot. That's what they've done, and you see this. Here are the solid lines. That's the actual fossil. Notice the dotted lines. That they merely think, they merely believe, they merely imagine that there were transition forms. Look, there are none. There are no transition forms. Now that is supposed to be their example. They cited this as an example of evolution between some basic types of creatures. There are no transition forms. There are no fossils there. And so we see, ladies and gentlemen, that they themselves have proven that their case is certainly based upon a house of cards. There's not evidence at all. It's supposition. They believe it, but they don't have the fossils. And that would be true, of course, of all their many other examples. And I think that simply takes care of the fossil record, although we might want to look at a few things about human origins. Could you turn that, maybe have that on, please, Mike? Very quickly, I want to take a quick look at human origins. The Australopithecines, first discovered in 1924 in South Africa. The skull that you see in the lower portion of the slide was the skull discovered by Dr. Louis Leakey and his wife Mary in 1959 in East Africa. Donald Johansen has discovered a series of these creatures, Australopithecus afarensis, in Ethiopia. One of the female, about 40% complete. He says she had the jaws, the teeth, the face, and brain of an ape, but she walked upright in the human manner. Lucy gained great fame because she's supposed to be an ape walking erect. And that's what we are taught in our textbooks and what we read every day. But ladies and gentlemen, there are many scientists who do not believe that, and some are evolutionists. Lord Zuckerman, very famous British anatomist, for 15 years had a scientific team that studied these fossils of creatures 1 to 2 million years more recent than Lucy. Therefore, it should be more man-like, you see, more upright, if anything. And Dr. Charles Oxnard, now at the University of Southern California, studied their postcranial skeleton, their foot bones, leg bones, knee joint, pelvis, and all of that. And these scientists, although they're not creationists, have stated that these creatures did not walk upright. They are not intermediate between ape and man, and they certainly are not our ancestors. Now, if you knock this creature out of the family tree of man, there's just not much left. Here's a Piltdown man, discovered in 1912. Few fragments of a jaw and a few fragments of a skull. And for 50 years, he was touted as our ancestors until he was proven to be a hoax by a chemist. Somebody had taken the jawbone of a modern ape, a human skull, had treated them with chemicals to make them look old, had filed the teeth to make them look man-like, planted the bones in the gravel pit, and fooled the world's greatest historians for nearly 50 years. Because, you see, this is what they had expected to find or wanted to find. Then in 1922, one single tooth was discovered in western Nebraska. Brought to the attention of several leading evolutionists. They were very excited by the discovery of this tooth. They believed it had characteristics intermediate between ape and man. And they called this creature Nebraska Man. In 1922, the Illustrated London News published a picture of this Nebraska Man based upon the descriptions of the scientists. We see that here in this slide on the right. We see Nebraska Man, we see his wife, we see the tool that they were using, all based upon one single tooth. Science is really a fascinating subject, isn't it? Well, a few years later, they discovered some additional remains of this creature. He turned out to be neither an ape-like man nor a man-like ape. He turned out to be a pig. That's right. It was a pig's tooth. Sometimes I'm tempted to say that this might have been the case when evolutionists made a man out of a pig, and the pig made a monkey out of the evolutionist. But in any case, these were good scientists. They were careful scientists. They were honest scientists, but they believed they were seeing something because they wanted to see it, because they, you see, thought they were seeing it. Now here we have Neanderthal man. This is the version of Neanderthal man that's been in our museums for nearly 100 years. Primitive subhuman creatures, long-armed, knuckle-dragging, beetle-browed, stoop-shouldered, bow-legged subhumans. It turned out that all these so-called primitive features were pathological. He suffered from arthritis. The reason some of them didn't walk upright, had a bad case of arthritis. Furthermore, they all suffered severely from rickets, which causes the softening of the bones and the malformation. And it turned out that all of these features were simply pathological. This is the modern version of Neanderthal man from the American Museum of Natural History, and you can see that he is indeed Homo sapien. About 30 years ago, a couple of scientists published an article about Neanderthal people, and they said, now really, if you take Neanderthal man, give him a shave and a haircut and a bath, put him in a business suit, place him on the New York subway, no one would take a second look. Well, that was 30 years ago, and of course today you wouldn't have to give him a shave or a haircut, would you? Some circles in San Diego, you wouldn't even have to give him a bath. Well, he wasn't our ancestor, he was man. You see, Piltdown man was not our ancestor, he was a hoax. And Nebraska man was not our ancestor, he's just simply a pig's tooth. Ramapithecus was not our ancestor, turned out to be an orangutan. I think the record here speaks for itself. Now let me, in closing, ladies and gentlemen, I want to challenge Dr. Plimer, any evolution, to explain metamorphosis, particularly in the monarch butterfly. That's an incredible process. This next slide, we see the monarch butterfly, and indeed a very beautiful creature. He lays eggs. The egg on the right is developing, and he develops into a caterpillar. He goes through several stages. This is the final stage, and now he decides somehow he wants to become a butterfly. I guess he started out by hang gliding or something, I don't know how. But here's the way he actually does it. He fastens himself to the underside of the limb, and he's curling up now. His head's going up there. He makes one last mold. He's molding that external cover, and he constructs a cocoon and becomes a mass of jelly. Then he programs that mass of jelly to become a butterfly. And we see the butterfly developing, and then finally he emerges from the cocoon, a beautiful butterfly. Now, my challenge to evolutionists is to explain how this process could have developed through a process of natural selection, step by step, through genetic mistakes. You see, we have a caterpillar. He has mouth parts to chew leaves. He crawls. That's his mode of life. Then he becomes a butterfly. Now he has wings. He has a proboscis when he sucks nectar and so forth and so on. How could a caterpillar, step by step, evolve into a butterfly? Would he start shedding some of those legs and sprouting wings or something like that? Well, of course he couldn't survive into a butterfly. Would he start shedding some of those legs and sprouting wings or something like that? Well, of course he couldn't survive under such circumstances. Furthermore, how could evolution program a mass of jelly to produce a butterfly? It's impossible to imagine how such a process could take place. It's silly to even think about it. You see, everything is programmed in that egg. The moment that egg is conceived, the program to produce that caterpillar, and then to convert that caterpillar into a mass of jelly, and to program that mass of jelly to become a butterfly, is all right there from the start. Now, I would like Dr. Plimer, I would like anybody, any evolutionist, to explain how that could have taken place. Now remember, ladies and gentlemen, it takes place through a series of genetic mistakes, because these mutations, which supposedly convert a little single-cell organism into you and I, in the course of its development and reproduction, began to make mistakes. We call them mutations. Now, the evolutionists admit almost all of those mutations are bad and produce all kinds of horrible things. We have hundreds and hundreds of genetic diseases produced by these mutations. And as a matter of fact, I do not know, I've never been convinced there's ever been one single good mutation. But let us suppose that almost all are bad, but once in a while one is good. Then you have to have this struggle for existence. And the good mutant replaces the original. Remember, the original was already highly adapted. He was highly prepared, or he never would have arisen, you see. And so there's not much of an advantage, just a slight advantage. You have to have all this struggle for existence and so forth, and you have to have millions and millions of these DNA accidental mistakes can convert man into, to convert a single-cell organism into man. Never happened in 5 billion years. It wouldn't happen in 500 billion years, and certainly not going to convert a caterpillar into a butterfly. It's not going to tell a master jelly how to program itself into a butterfly. If anybody knows that, I'd be very happy to hear it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let me just conclude by saying this. All I'm asking you to do is weigh all of the evidence on each side, and then decide for yourself which model of origins, creation or evolution, do the data fit best. In my scientific studies, I've become convinced the best statement we can say about our origins today is still, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. I thank you very, very much.
Without further ado, I now call on Dr. Plimer to present the case for evolution and argue that it is not the pseudoscience that Dr. Gish would have us all believe. Yes, thank you, Dr.
Creation science is a contradiction in terms. I accuse the leaders of fraud, perversity, heresy, fabricating their evidence, and lying about scientific evidence. We had this book as an example. What we were not told was that Michael Denton at this university last year said and admitted he was wrong. That was published. He also said that he was unaware of the fossil record when he wrote it. Creationism requires a young Earth, not a geological age, a very young Earth. So we're not talking about thousands of years as a geologist. We are talking about thousands of millions of years. So we are talking about a factor of 1 million. Creationism requires catastrophic events. As we heard in the Cambrian, we had to have some catastrophe to get things possible. I want to investigate the implications of creationist science. I want to look at their publications. I want to look at how they communicate and teach their science. And I want to look at how they get their data. Let's first look at catastrophic events. One of the major arguments used is the Great Flood. The bulk of this continent, this Earth, sediments and fossils, we hear formed in the Great Flood. And we have a split in their science there. One arm says we had continental drifting and the other arm says we haven't. So to be fair, we look at both possibilities. Continental drifting is where we show that the continents have pulled apart and have moved and have collided. This is a massive process. If we had continental drifting immediately after the Great Flood, then our continents would have been moving at 4 kilometres a year. Now, has any mariner recorded continents moving at 4 kilometres a year? Yet our creationists want this to have happened every year for the last 4,000 years. Why did Columbus go in 1492? If he went 500 years earlier, it would have been 2,000 kilometres closer. That is the level of their science that they expect us to believe. If we have the continents pulling apart at that rate, immediately after the Great Flood, and this is the theory of one of the doyens of the creationists, we'll come back to him later. This is his magnificent theory. Then we would have had uplift of mountain ranges of more than a metre per year every year for the last 4,000 years. Was that ever recorded in the Atlas Mountains, in the Alps, in the Andes? Has anyone seen mountains go up a metre a year? No, but that's the sort of science they want to teach us. When we pull apart the crust, we have enormous catastrophic processes which take place. We have earthquakes, we have volcanoes, and we have tidal waves. If we pulled apart our continents in the last 4,000 years, that since the Great Flood, we would have had an earthquake, catastrophic earthquake, much greater than the one that hit Tokyo yesterday, a catastrophic earthquake every 6 minutes for the last 4,000 years. Never happened. We would have had a catastrophic volcano every 12 minutes. So much dust thrown in the atmosphere that the atmosphere would have been cool because it would have been perpetually dark. We would have had a nuclear winter for the last 4,000 years since the Great Flood, if we believe this sort of science. The cooling of new volcanic rock requires circulating seawater. We have, using these calculations, 270 cubic kilometres of new volcanic rock that must have come out of every one of the Earth's 500 volcanoes. Every year, every volcano for the last 4,000 years would have thrown out 270 cubic kilometres of rock. We haven't seen it, but we've got to cool all that rock. If we cool it with seawater, our seawater temperature becomes above 100 degrees Celsius. We also have a massive process from our volcanicity and our earthquakes giving us tidal waves. So we have an earthquake every 6 minutes, a major volcanic process every 12 minutes, covering the earth with gases and dust, and every 18 minutes a tidal wave. Now the simple question is, if this has happened every 6 minutes, 12 minutes and 18 minutes over the last 4,000 years, why wasn't it recorded in history? We have a continuous record of history. That's the sort of science they want us to believe. Now, the only possible answer I can give you is that how can you write history when every 6 minutes your desk wobbles, it's permanently dark and you get hit with a tidal wave of boiling water every 18 minutes? That is science. Okay, let's look at the other possibility, that we haven't had continental drift when we've had this great catastrophic flood, where we've had a sudden burial. If we're going to have a great flood, as a scientist you ask the question, where does the water come from? We have had 4.4 billion cubic kilometres of water to cover this earth in a great flood. Where does that water come from? If it comes from the atmosphere, from the vapour canopy, then that requires atmospheric pressure to be 840 times greater than today. That requires the atmosphere to have 99.9% water vapour and 0.02% oxygen. Not really an ideal pre-cruise atmosphere, is it? To condense that water into rain would require a raising of atmospheric temperature to 3,500 degrees Celsius. So it's quite clear from very simple school child physics that we couldn't have had a great flood by an enormous amount of rain. Okay, all the other possibilities come out of the earth, bubbling out of the earth. We know from drilling deep holes that the porosity of the Earth's crust is a long way less than 1%. The second thing is we know from drilling holes that the water gets hotter and hotter and hotter, and we get temperatures of 300 and 400 degrees Celsius in the crust. So if we were to have 4.4 billion cubic kilometres of water for our catastrophic event to form his fossil, our water would have come out onto the surface at 350 degrees Celsius, and we would have been on a crust that had a porosity greater than 50% quicksand. The whole crust would have been quicksand before the Great Flood. We don't have any record of that, but that's the sort of stuff we're expected to believe. Let's look at a few of the other problems. If we didn't have continental drift, then to explain the creationist argument, we have a minor logistics problem. Noah would have had to have gone to Australia to collect the endemic species from here. He would have had to have gone to Cape York, to Central Australia, to Tasmania, maybe even punished himself and gone to New Zealand and gone to the Andes to collect the fauna and flora there, gone to the Gobi Desert to finish Lapland. He had to do all of that before the Great Flood. Is it really scientific to expect that poor Noah went on an uncharted, unknown world to collect the 2 million known kinds of animals we have? Very simple. The logic doesn't work. Then we've got a bit of a problem when we're on our ark. We have many organisms that do not survive in zoos, let alone in an ark, in wildly turbulent conditions. We have many animals that require very special diets, like the koala, or like the carnivores, or his colleagues are trying to tell us that the dinosaurs were on the ark. Dinosaurs 30 metres in length, on an ark 155 metres long and 15 metres high. Now what would happen if those dinosaurs, that dinosaur pair of 30 metres in size, decided to populate on that ark? That's the sort of logic. They recognise they have a fundamental logical problem. So they say, well, we have young dinosaurs, hence copulation is more likely. So the logic doesn't work. But let's then look at our 2 million kinds of organisms which we've had on the ark. They came in pairs, so we have 4 million on this ark. So we have 2 million organisms today. And in the fossil record, all those organisms which were wiped out in the Great Flood, we only have 200,000. So in 4,000 years we've gone from 200,000 to 2 million, and that's evolution. That's using their figures. So it's very clear that we have major problems if we want to look at catastrophic progress. But let's look at these 2 million organisms on the ark. Many of these were meant to have survived the catastrophic process. Now, how did some bacteria and virus, which lived for less than a year, how did they survive on the ark? How did the humans survive on the ark? Humans have a number of diseases that no other organism carried. Now, the humans on the ark must have carried measles, a type of pneumonia, typhus, typhoid fever, smallpox, polio, and good old syphilis and gonorrhea, leprosy, 4 types of malarial parasites, 2 types of tapeworm, an intestinal worm, a pinworm, 3 types of lice, and on we go. So what Noah's family had to carry makes AIDS look like a minor cold. That's the science they want us to believe. Then we have another life problem. Noah's very ill family, on a very small ark, had to carry food and feed 4 million organisms every day. Now, if you want to believe that, then you are talking religion. If you want to believe it, his work, then let's continue with our science. So we have a problem when the ark reaches Mount Ararat and settles down quietly. Out of this ark comes stumbling a population which is emaciated, disease-ridden, blinking into the light after the flood-ridden world. And what have they got to eat? What did the carnivores eat? They couldn't have eaten the herbivores because we've got them today. And what did the herbivores eat? There was no vegetation. It was either all fossilised or covered in mud. So what did the herbivores eat? Did they eat mud? That's the sort of science that we're meant to believe from this catastrophic event. Then we have a few other little problems, and we become very parochial here and look at some of the Australian mammals. My favourite little friend is the blind marsupial mole. Now, our poor blind marsupial mole comes out of the ark, nothing to eat, can't see, doesn't know where to go, but it just happens to come back to Australia where his fossil ancestors live. That's their science. Now, what is even more surprising about my dear little fluffy friend is he got here across a mythical land bridge and managed to get through Malaysia before the Malaysian tiger got there. So how did he do it? Did he look at signposts? This is the sort of problem we're confronted with. We have a few other little problems. Our New World primates. How did our New World primates in South America find their way back from Turkey to exactly the place where the fossil ancestors were found? How did they do it? How did flightless birds go to isolated oceanic islands? We have flightless birds with a 3-metre wingspan, weighing up to 500 kilos in weight. These flightless birds have managed to go to isolated islands like Madagascar, such as the elephant bird, or Mauritius, the dodo, or New Caledonia for the cargo, or from New Zealand for the moa. How did these birds do it? If they can't fly and they go to these tiny little oceanic islands. But how did they find their way back from the ark to where their fossil ancestors were found? This is the lesson of their science. Some of the other catastrophes which we are fed with concern coal. And this is interesting because coal is always within terrestrial sequences. So I find it hard to understand how this would have formed in a great flood. Let's forget the obvious inanities and continue. Our creationist literature and some of their methods, and we have some marvellous revelations. And one of them is that we find fossilised iron bolts and fossilised gold chains, they only 8 carats by the way, the fossilised gold chains within coal. We have reports of that from this country. Now that's interesting. First question is, why do we mine coal? Why do we mine for gold? Obviously, no gold. The second question is even more interesting, and a year ago I challenged someone to give me a gold chain from a coal seam in this country. I offered $20,000. This $20,000 was offered in the coal fields, where every day 25,000 men are underground. I haven't lost a penny yet. Now surely science is based on observation. But let's look at the implications of this magnificent find of gold chains within Eastern Australian coal. Gold first came to this country in 1788. Coal was discovered in 1791. So we must have had the Great Flood in Eastern Australia between 1788 and 1791. So we shouldn't be celebrating the bicentennial of Australia. We should be celebrating the bicentennial of the Great Flood. That's the sort of logic we are left with. The implications of their science do not stand up to simple schoolboy science. Now let's look at the favourite one, which we get faced with, and that is the speed of light. We have a very well-known creation scientist, so well known, he's attached to no institute and has no qualifications and is hidden somewhere down in South Australia, who has written some work suggesting that the speed of light has slowed down enormously since creation. This is based, and I won't go into on a number of erroneous assumptions and just plain things that are wrong, but the aim of the exercise is very clear. That is to make time, geological time, instead of being thousands of years old, to make it, instead of being thousands of millions of years old, to make it thousands of years old. So they're trying to shorten time. And this chronophobia is what I want to discuss now. The chronophobia of our creation. The suggestion by our friend Setterfield is that at the time of creation, the speed of light was 200 billion times faster than now. So when God said, let there be light, that speed of light was 200 billion times faster than now. The suggestion by Setterfield is that light stopped slowing down in 1960. Setterfield also argues that the speed of light started to slow down at the first sin. So that means that from 1960 onwards we've had no sin. Did you notice? That's their time. Let us now look at a very simple equation. Einstein's equation, which most of you would learn from comic books or television. E equals mc squared, where c equals the speed of light. So that means the energy, when we're using c squared, the energy at the time of creation was 40 billion times greater than any similar process today. So if Adam lovingly lit a fire for Eve, the energy given out in that fire is equivalent to a 50 megaton bomb. That is science. Adam and Eve had 3 children. The very act of procreation involves a release of energy. The act of procreation for those 3 children would have released energy equivalent to an explosion of 500 tons of TNT. That's the origin of the expression that the earth moved for you all. That's their science. If we have the speed of light 200 billion times faster than now, and we could see things, then the only form light could have been in would have been as high energy gamma radiation. Radiation thickness within minutes, death within hours. So that is the sort of science we are confronted with when our creationist friends want to change the fact. Something I want to talk about later. When they want to change a fundamental, like the speed of light, the speed of light. You look at the implications of it and it is ridiculous, because that's what it is. The second law of thermodynamics. Tonight I got very frightened to learn the universe was running down. I really think that once you know the universe is running down, you should join up. That's the aim of the exercise. But the second law of thermodynamics is an interesting argument that is always used. I heard exactly the same argument on Wednesday by Dr. Gish. It was just cranking the same handle. First, we start with the second law of thermodynamics. We say it's a closed system, and we go from the simple to the complex, or from the ordered to the disordered. And then, after the handle's been cranked 5 times, it was 4 today, so you're doing well, after it was cranked 4 or 5 times, suddenly the open system slips in. And immediately, we hear nothing about equilibrium, and we hear nothing about the open system. So if we use his arguments, and he's very keen on chicken, so let's use one. We start with an egg. It is a closed system. You put a bit of energy on it and keep it like that for a little while, and the egg becomes a chicken. So that's the exact opposite of what he's saying. So the first trick of his second law of thermodynamics is that he omits to tell you two fundamentals. He makes an assumption that the universe is at equilibrium. He also makes the assumption that the universe is a closed system. That would be nice to know if it was or if it was not. We also heard this, I heard from him on Wednesday, how when we have the second law of thermodynamics operating, everything's running down, and please join up and pay your money because the world is ending quickly. And we heard a magnificent statement about wearing out molecules. I would like to know how you can wear out an oxygen molecule. How do you do it? Do you rub a few electrons off on the outside, or do you selectively pluck out a few protons? That's what we're getting to. We have a number of red herrings which we are continually fed. Most of them are because there is no attempt made to get to the source. I was bewildered to hear about Nebraska Man tonight. Nebraska Man was first published in the Illustrated London News of December the 17th, which you know is Beethoven's birthday, of 1927, and the reputation of it was by the scientists who found it, and the reputation was in a scientific journal. So it's like the Daily Mirror publishing something and calling it science, and later the scientists refuted it. But that is quoted across. We hear also the evolution from hydrogen to people. Did we hear anything about nuclear fusion? No. So we are always not given the complete story, and if we go back to the source, we have a few problems. We heard a probability argument. An absolutely improbable situation exists. Well, I don't understand. And we can have a probability argument using the 26 letters of the alphabet and 120 combinations of them. And I'll read you the start of what it says. It says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And on we go." If we look at any probability, we can randomly, quite easily, pick a combination of 26 letters of the alphabet, throw them together. You can do it with the Kabul phone book, and you can get a unique situation. You can do it with anything. That is the sort of argument we get fed. What I want to now talk about are some of our scientific publications which come from our creationists. The creationists will not allow refutation by science. They will not allow a process of improving, of correction. I use the same principle. And I use our friend's book, or booklet, it's more like a comic, which was called Are You Being Brainwashed? I go to page 8. There is a diagram there that says pre-Cambrian, void of fossils. That is a lie. The pre-Cambrian is not void of fossils. The pre-Cambrian is extremely rich in fossils. It has come to the country where there are many pre-Cambrian fossils going back to 3,300 million years ago. On the same diagram, he says the Earth's crust is void of fossils. That is a lie. Every fossil found on this planet is from the Earth's crust. That is from his book, Are You Being Brainwashed? Page 8. We also see on the same page the Cambrian, a geological time period of some time ago. And I quote, "The billions of fossils found are all of highly complex forms of life." That is a lie. So on one simple diagram we have 3 lies. That is their scientific publication. We turn over to page 9 and we read, "Not a single indisputable multicellular fossil has been found anywhere in the world in a rock supposedly older than Cambrian rocks." That is a lie. But what we get is the repetition of these lies. all the time. You don't find fossils in old rocks, you don't find fossils in old rocks, you don't find fossils in old rocks, and eventually someone believes it. So we've had 2 and a bit pages, and we've got ourselves 4 lies. Now we have an interesting situation here, because one of the Australian creationists, Andrew Snelling, and I quote, he says, Precambrian rocks are either rich in fossils or they commonly contain abundant organic matter, which is the remains of fossils. The question is, which creationist is lying? There is no choice. Continuing with page 9. Billions of highly complex animals just suddenly appear with no signs of gradual development from lower forms. That is a lie. So we have now had 55 words and 5 lies. 1 lie every 11 words in this publication. I asked him, how can the fossil record be so cruel to creationists? And the answer is, you fabricate. You ignore, you say it doesn't exist. Now we've had it 5 times in 2 pages. Second law of thermodynamics, I counted it on Wednesday 32 times in 50 minutes. So you just crank the hands off, the same stuff coming out all the time. Okay, now let's look at the way they teach their science. There has been a move in this country and elsewhere to have creation science taught at the same level, the same bias as evolution science. Unfortunately, science is integrated. You cannot pluck out evolution science, which is why I'm talking about physics, geology, and later on a few other very interesting things. And I go to Smith School in Livermore in California as an example of how creationists teach their science. Smith School in Livermore, California was awarded a grant for 6 gifted 12-year-old children. This was a grant for special learning. I have the order form from the teacher, a Mr. Baird, and it documents what he ordered. Not the 6 children, but the 30 children. He has ordered material from the Institute of Creation Research and nothing else. That is fraud, and that is being dealt with currently in the courts. So when you let them into the school, we start to have just a little bit of fraud creep in, just an innocent error, but it creeps in. Those 30 children had a course entitled Creationism and Evolution. Much of the material ordered was material written by Gish. Some of it was written by one of his colleagues, Gary Parker, and I quote from his little comic book that was given out to the children in this course. And the comic book is entitled Dry Bones and Other Fossils. And it says, and I quote, evolution is based on the belief that you have to explain everything without God. I'll say it again, if it doesn't sink in. Evolution is based on the belief that you have to explain everything without God. That is perverse and it's heresy. So you give them an inch into our schools, and that's what they do. Now the science course that these 12-year-old children were taught, the only material they were given in this course on creationism and evolution, the only material they were given was from the Institute of Creation Research. This teacher, Mr. Baird, gave them a lovely balanced course. Now how do I know that? I have the children's original worksheets, directing them what to study and how to do it. I also have the children's pre-test study sheets, telling them where the information is and how to do it. So I have the children's information from a school. These are 12-year-old kids, and they are being directed to look at only one course in apparently a balanced course. I have the children's final examination paper from Smith School, Livermore, California, his state. And we have a remarkable situation exists. These 12-year-old kids, after a balanced course on creation and evolution, were forced to make a decision between creationism and atheism. Not creationism and evolution, creationism and atheism. Now what happened was that the 6 gifted children rejected creationism. These 6 gifted children were sent back to the library to do it again and to look at the forms again. 2 of those children became atheists. 4 of them had to lie to save their skin. How do I know that? Because it's documented. So you let them into the school, and that's what happens. So as soon as they're in the school, we have fraud, perversity, heresy. They don't teach science, and our Christian friends create atheists. That's what happens. Now let's look at how they get some of their data. We have documentation of the way in which our friends acquire information, gather their data, and disseminate it. I refer to a July 1982 debate, a PBS debate, between Gish and a Dr. Russell Doolittle, and the well-known scientific information about the genetic similarity of chimpanzee and man was used as an argument to show that there is not an evolution of man from the ape, but that chimpanzee and man had a common progenitor, a common precursor. Quick as a frost, our Dr. Gish came back with an answer and said, yes, the bullfrogs have protein and genetic structures closer to man than chimps. So straight away, we've got an answer. So what do? We go to the source of this information and try to find the answer. So we have a public debate on television. The well-known scientific fact that chimpanzee and man have very close genetical ties is put up, and as a refutation, as an argument against it, we have a statement from a scientist, PhD from the University of California, from a scientist saying that bullfrogs have a genetic structure much closer to man than chimpanzees. In the Institute of Creation Science's own literature, the magazine Origin, 2 scientists, Chardeville and Patterson, accused Gish of publicly lying on television and demanded the data be produced. It was not. There have been continual demands to have this data produced. At a Bible science conference in Cleveland, Ohio, again, when pressed, our friend gave the answer, and I quote, "I have no responsibility to produce the evidence." So here we have a scientist debating that suddenly has this magnificent fact that bullfrog protein is closer to man than chimpanzee protein. We try to find the source of this information, and our scientist stonewalls. He says, "I am not going to give you the evidence." So what do you do when you have a scientist that makes a statement like this and refuses to give you the evidence? All we are left with is going to the Bible. And I go to Revelation. Revelation 16 and 13. And I read, "And I saw 3 unclean spirits, like frogs, come out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet." So when we take the source all of the information, we find it is fabricated. That is the only creation I can find. Creation of facts ex nihilo. Creation of facts out of nothing. When we look and try to find the information, we don't get it. And we are left with only one alternative, that we have uncleanliness coming out of the mouth of a false prophet. That is the sort of science that is generated from our creation. So we have a situation where, when we look at the implications of their very, very simple science, that it is absolute idiocy. When we have a look at their publications, we find an interesting statistic. 1 in 11 words is a blatant lie. It is well documented in all books that we have pre-Cambrian fossils. 1 in 11 words is a lie. We have fabrication of data. We have this publicly on television, and the only alternative we've got, I have given you. So when we hear the handle cranking with this pitter-patter about Baron 747s and evolution, you must, if you have a critical brain, go to the source all the time of the information. Now, the second law of thermodynamics is something which we have heard many, many times in these debates. And I want to bring up some information on the second law of thermodynamics. Drink first. Our second law of thermodynamics argues that we have order going to disorder. Or, in a closed system, we have information which is just slowly running down and running down and running down. I've looked at Gish's performance in states. Now, in this country, we have an organisation called the Creation Science Foundation Limited. It is a company. It is limited by law. All their documents are submitted to the Corporate Affairs Commission. These are public documents. No problems in getting them. So when we go to the Corporate Affairs Commission in Brisbane and have a look at the Creation Science Foundation in this country, we find there are 7 members only. 7 members. All of you other people have been given money, but you're not members. You have no power, no voting rights. We have 7 members. That is a closed system. Now let us look at the second part of the second law of thermodynamics. When we look at the Creation Science Foundation Limited account, very easy to find, public information, we find that in the year 1985, $92,358 just vanished, disappeared. That is order to disorder. So when we look at the Creation Science Foundation in this country, it is a closed shop. 7 people who can control it, have their hand in the till, whatever you want to call it. And there is a not insubstantial amount of money, $92,358, which is unaccounted for. It just disappears. So you can't trust these people with your children. You can't trust them even with your money. So that is the record in this country. Documented public information. Very, very easy to get. You just walk into the Corporate Affairs Commission and find. When we allow our creationists to talk science, if we press them for an answer and follow it to the end, we get idiocy. When we look at their publications, we have one lie in every 11 words. When we look at their public performance, they fabricate the data. We have uncleanliness coming out of the mouth of a false prophet. With their teaching of science, it is based on fraud, on perversity, on heresy. They don't even teach science, and they create atheists. This is the organisation we have. And then when we look at their accounts in this country, we have an enormous amount of money that just is unaccounted for. So are we talking about scientists? Are we talking about missionaries? Are we having lies told for God? Are we having lies told for mammon? No. There is only one conclusion that you come to when you have a good look at the operations and activities of the Creator. They are telling lies for mammon. Here is Satan. He wants God's blessing for the devil's work.
The adjudicator will adjudicate, not the audience. There is now going to take 15 minutes. Again, it will be timed. Then they will go into a 5-minute summation. From that, we will then go into the question time. The questions will be from the audience. We will come to you with a radio mic. You will ask a question. If the adjudicator considers that you are making a statement, you'll be cut off, so be very careful about what you're going to say. We'll take one question to either side, alternatively, and we're going to try and finish just a smidgen after 10 o'clock. So if people wish to stay behind after, they may, but basically we're going to try to aim and finish at that time. The adjudicator, at the end of the questions, will then sum up. Okay, Dr. Gish.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I point out first of all that Dr. Plimer presented not one single iota of evidence for evolution. 's strictly theatrical. He resorted to mudraking. He was abusive and slanderous. May I say it was the most disgusting performance I've ever witnessed in my life. And I've had 200 debates throughout the world and some of the leading evolutionists. Now, first of all, about Dr. Denton. I just had lunch with Dr. Denton yesterday. I had a nice long conversation with him. Dr. Denton did not deny or go back on anything that he put in this book. This is what he did say, that if he were going to write a book on this subject, that he would take a different approach. The evidence that he discussed in here, he said, is subjective. And really, just about all evidence on evolution is subjective. But from the perspective now in genetic research, he believes it's possible to objectively establish whether evolution is possible or not. And certainly from his present state of knowledge, he believes it to be objectively proven that it is impossible. So if he wrote another book on this subject, it would be from the perspective of genetics. But he has not withdrawn anything that he put in this book. That was a false statement. Now, furthermore, Dr. Plimer quoted from my book, or little brainwash booklet written 17 years ago. It's a little book, you might call it a comic-style book, was not written in comic terms at all, but written 17 years ago. At that time, according to Dr. Preston Cloud, one of the world's leading evolutionary geologists, there were no undoubted pre-Cambrian fossils. That's what he said. Now, here is, and I quoted many years ago Dr. Cloud to that effect. Because he said, first of all, you would not know, you could not establish for certain whether these rocks were pre-Cambrian or Cambrian, some of these rocks. And furthermore, there's many pseudofossils that have been discovered. Now, since that time, as I described in my debate, there are many published reports of discovery of microfossils in pre-Cambrian rocks. And furthermore, the ediacaran, which I did describe in my talk, is supposed to be pre-Cambrian. I discussed all of that in my book, Evolution, the Challenge of the Fossil Record, which was published 2 years ago. Why didn't Dr. Plimer consult this book? Why didn't he see what I had written that is up to date? To accuse me of lying is terribly, terribly wrong. I stated the facts as I knew them then, as Preston Cloud and others have stated, in this edition, 1985, 15 years later, I have published what I described in my lecture. Dr. Plimer completely ignored what I said in my lecture and what I put in my book to try to accuse me of lying. Now, all of this funny stuff about Noah and the ark and the flood and all that, that's just a caricature. I don't know of any creation science that believes what he said. Now, Barry Setterfield is the man here that has postulated that the speed of light has slowed down based upon the determinations over the last 300 years. Let me say this. I don't support that. As a matter of fact, among the creation, there are many creations. In my institute, Dr. Gerald Archer, who has his doctorate in nuclear physics from Toronto University, has written a very, very critical article about Barry Setterfield's work to try to thrust that as being, first of all, nonsense, and then to almost fraudulent, and to lay that on all the creation science. That itself is false. Now, Barry, I don't know whether Barry Setterfield is right. I've never supported the work. I say let's stand back and let's see what happens in the next 30 or 40 years. See if it does stand up under scrutiny. Now, Dr. Plimer said something about the second law of thermodynamics, as if the development of a chicken egg into a hen violates the second law of thermodynamics. That's utter nonsense, ladies and gentlemen. The egg is not a closed system. It's not an isolated system. And besides, at the moment of conception, that egg is programmed to become a chicken. It has all of the information necessary. It's right there in the genetic system. It has all of the metabolic systems necessary to develop into a chicken. All it needs is to take in energy, and so it happens. But, you see, it's programmed to do that. It has the machinery to do that, just like a green plant. A green plant can absorb carbon dioxide and nitrogen. It can absorb water and phosphorus, sulfur, and so forth, and convert that into a very complicated thing. There's no problem with the second law of thermodynamics because it has the machinery. It has photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is an incredibly complex machinery. Not only does it have to have photosynthesis, it's got to have all those other metabolic machines in that cell. The problem for the evolutionists to explain where that machinery came from in the first place. That's the problem. Do you mean to tell me that ultraviolet light coming down on nitrogen and carbon dioxide and so forth will convert that into photosynthesis? The complicated machinery absolutely required for life? Well, that is pure nonsense. Even ammonia cannot survive in the presence of ultraviolet light. Ammonia is decomposed by ultraviolet light, and if that can't survive, then how could amino acids survive, or purines, or pyrimidines, or DNA, or protein? Now, Dr. Plimer says this is nonsense about molecules decaying and deteriorating. Well, he certainly doesn't know anything about biochemistry. When we isolated vasopressin from the posterior pituitary gland. When I was working at Cornell University Medical College, is isolated from posterior pituitary gland. We take that material, 500 units per milligram, put it in the ampule, put it under nitrogen, seal it, and put it in the deep freeze. And yet, week after week, just test the activity, go from 500 units per milligram to 450 to 400 to 300, and right down to zero eventually. Yes, molecules do deteriorate. That's true of DNA, and it's true of anybody who's worked with DNA does know you have to do everything you can to preserve that material because it does deteriorate. Dr. Plimer never answered this question about the origin of the universe, the origin of the universe. The universe is an isolated system. It is a closed system. The second law of thermodynamics does apply to its origin. And the second law of thermodynamics says a closed system, an isolated system, can never start in a state of disorder and transform itself into a state of order and complexity. We never even tried to answer that question. If the natural laws are destroying the universe, how can they create it? I'd like a rational answer to that question. Now he says about probability. I can't get what he meant by that. If you're going to go in a jumble of words, what are you going to get out of it? You're going to get nonsense. That's all. You're not going to get a message. We have messages here on this paper. Here's a message. There's a message. It conveys information. Now, you just didn't throw all these letters into a hat and shake them up and get that message. And you never get that message that way. Not in a million years. Not in 500 billion years would you get that message. By the way, you know what this message is? It's a letter of agreement by Isaac Asimov to permit the use of his movies and pictures, either in video, in movies, in stills and so forth, given to the Dutch group that's filmed the series How the World Came to Be. And yet these people, these evolutionists here in Australia, have slandered the creationists by claiming that Dr. Asimov had not given permission to use his portion in the film series How the World Came to Be. Well, I'm not accusing Dr. Asimov of lying, but I'll tell you one thing, his memory's pretty short. Because here's the letter right here that he signed, a signed agreement. Now to accuse creationists of using that film material against his will and without his permission is a slanderous untruth. It is not true. They did have permission. Now, this story about what happened in Livermore, California. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a school teacher up there that did something he should not have done. Something that none of the creation scientists would have wanted him to do because he used books that were not written for use in public schools. The Institute for Creation Research, for example, has published books devoid of any reference to the Bible or the book of Genesis or religious literature of any kind designed for use in public schools. That teacher purchased books that were published specifically for use in Christian schools. And therefore, he violated school policy and he's reprimanded for it. And none of us would have defended it. And it has nothing to do with what we're trying to put in the public schools. We don't want to put religion in the public schools. We don't want to teach Genesis in the public schools. First of all, we wouldn't like the way most of the teachers would teach it. And in the United States, I know you don't have that law here, but in the United States you can't do that under the present interpretation of the courts. And so we have no intention to do that. Look, they accuse us. Are they accusing us of being censors or book burners or something like that? That's sheer nonsense. In the United States, 86% of the American people want creation taught in the public schools. Only 8% wants evolution only. 6% had no opinion. All right, 86% to 80. What's happened? They can only teach evolution. Is that democracy? Is that academic freedom? All we want is the scientific evidence. That's what we want taught, the kind of evidence that I presented tonight. Now, if somebody wants to try to refute it, if one wants to talk against it, that's fine. Let's have our arguments and our case and our scientific evidence, let them have theirs, and then let the students decide for themselves. I think you students are intelligent enough to make a careful decision. I think you can weigh the evidence. I don't think you have to be subjected to brainwashing by people who consider themselves to be the intellectual elite, the possessors of the sole truth, and therefore they must protect the students from error. I don't think that's true at all. Now, this claim about the Creation Science Foundation, $92,000, it just disappeared. You see, the implication is clear that somebody in that foundation absconded with those funds. Let me tell you, they had some reserve funds which they invested at the advice of some investment firm, and the rascal in the firm absconded with the funds. So let me tell you this. Recently in the United States, E.F. Hutton had invested $40 million in an investment firm, and somebody in that firm absconded with all that money, including millions of dollars that belonged to other people. Now, are you going to accuse E.F. Hutton of being a bunch of crooks or something like that? Listen, the Institute for Creation Research, we have reserve funds too. We're not going to put that under the carpet. We're not going to hide it. We are going to invest it somewhere to give us a return. Now, of course, if you want to be absolutely safe, you put it in insured bonds or something like that. But sometimes there are people you trust who promise you a good return, and you invest your money and you lose it sometime. But to accuse the creationists of being somehow guilty of fraud or thievery or something like that is downright shameful. Now, these things about the proteins. I made a statement, verbal statement, never published it, never put it in print, that the albumin of humans are more similar to that of frogs than that of chimps, or at least as similar. The statement that I was repeating was made by Dr. Garnis Curtis, an evolutionist. He made that in a lecture I heard at the University of California at Davis a number of years ago. I accepted it. He certainly did not. If there was a joke on anybody, it was on the people who were using proteins to date. He's a radiochronologist. He was trying to put down this idea of using proteins to date things because he believes in geochronology. And so if there's a joke on anybody, it was on the people who use the proteins. And I used that. And then people say it's not true, and then they say that I somehow lied about it or something like that. And about the proteins of man, more like that of a chicken than that of an ape. Well, if you look at the lysozymes, human lysozyme, and lactalbumin, and then look at the lysozyme of a chicken, you'll find that the lysozyme of man is more like the lysozyme of chicken than it's like lactalbumin of humans. And yet the human lysozyme and lactalbumin both are split off much later than the earlier split. And if you just looked at this data blind, if you didn't know where these proteins came from or what they were, you would say on the basis of that data, man was more similar to the chicken than he was to the ape. And that's, if you're going to look at the data in an objective manner, that's what you would have to decide. Now, how much more time do I have? 2 minutes. Dr. Plimer went through this so-called creation model. Oh, by the way, let me do this. All this stuff about Noah going out and gathering up family, this is a lot of nonsense. He never read the Bible, obviously, because the Bible says God brought the animals to the ark. Noah didn't go out and search for them. Furthermore, if you read the Bible, he said that the Bible says only those land-dwelling, air-breathing creatures had to go on the ark, and there's only about 20,000 such species today, not 4 million. And so what he's talked about is simply a lot of nonsense. Now, here's an article that appeared in the Australian Science Teacher's Journal in May of 1986 on page 37 by a science teacher, an Australian science teacher. The abstract reads as follows. The evolution versus creation debate has come to Australia. Some evolutionists contend that creationism is pseudoscience because creationists introduced a supernatural being into science. From the standpoint of the philosophy of science, this view is erroneous. Both evolutionary, naturalistic, and creationist views are metaphysical and can act as frameworks to guide science. If both views of the origin of life are metaphysical, then it is indoctrination to teach one view in the classroom. Classroom science teaching should reflect an accurate picture of science. At present, classroom science is portrayed from a discredited inductivist viewpoint which uncritically presents evolution as science and creationism as pseudoscience. If criticism is an important component of science, then good science teaching would inform a student of the tentative nature of any theory concerned with the origin of life and teach both evolutionary and creationist ideas together. End quote. I agree totally with that view. Ladies and gentlemen, I presented what I consider to be careful, reasoned, serious scientific evidence supporting the creation model. I've been subjected to the worst of views that I've ever seen in my life. And I want you to remember this. When somebody does that, he's simply admitting that his scientific case is weak. Because if he had a strong scientific case, he could state the facts. The facts would speak for themselves. Thank you very much.
This little book seems to have caused a little trouble with our friend. It was written 17 years ago, and he refused it. Why is it I could buy it outside 20 minutes ago? Why could I buy it? Because what I'm talking about is this little thing on the front, the pride. Doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong, just tell it. We also heard in our refutation that God brought the animals to the ark. Thank you. You are talking religion. You have given up any science you have. The debate here tonight is not religion versus evolution or creation versus evolution. It is a total debate on science. You cannot put evolution out of the total integration of all of science. But let me tell you about some of the... I have a very nice scientific fact to show you, and I will call you onto the stage if you'd like it in a minute. Our scientific experts that have been quoted, again we go to the source. We have a Dr. Harold Flusher. Flusher has a DSc degree from the Indiana Christian University, which is not an accredited institution, and a PhD from the Columbia Pacific. That is equivalent to the Ironclad Hotel at Marble Bar giving you a doctorate. That's the sort of qualifications we have. Our scientific expert on creationism in this country is a Dr. Andrew Snelling. In 1985 and again in 1987, he published in the scientific literature about Proterozoic rocks in Northern Territory. In the scientific literature, Proterozoic rocks are those between 600 million years and 2,500 million years. The same scientists in the creationist literature, using the same techniques, the same rocks from the same area, published that these rocks were thousands of years old. So when we try to talk about the science of our creation scientists, either they forget to put 6 little zeros after a number, or our lovely evangelist missionaries just seem to forget truth. Now let me talk about the science. 68 scientific journals over 4 years received 135 scientific manuscripts. 18 of these were created. None were accepted for publication. That is science. I know why. Now, the theory of evolution is one we hear and see a lot as being an unsubstantiated theory, just a sequence of ideas. Scientific theory is put into the area of being unsubstantiated ideas. This is a favourite argument, that evolution is just a theory. Now, I want to do a little experiment with Dr. Gish on what scientific theory is. This is the science you have been waiting for. This is using the theory of electricity. Now, if the theory of science is just some sort of vague idea, and the theory of evolution is just some sort of vague idea, what is the theory of electricity? I'll show you. In this country, Dr. Gish, it is 240 volts, not 110 volts. Now tell me about the theory of science. Touch it. He can't. He can't.
Since you've invited me to do so, I will do so. That is repeatable, testable science. But your notion that an ape has evolved into people, can you see apes evolving into people today? Can you go out there and see that?
Has now demonstrated that he is selective. He does not want to believe the theory of evolution, but wants to believe the theory of electricity. Now, I would also like to demonstrate with this the second law of thermodynamics. Touches this wire, we go from cranial disorder to prostrate order. That is the second law of thermodynamics. Now, I have just received a message. Some of you are praying that I touch this wire. Well, we will, and we will show you that the crowd goes from order to disorder. So the second law of thermodynamics, you can massage whatever way you want. I've just shown. He is quite happy to prepare to accept a scientific theory on electricity, but he is not prepared to accept the theory of evolution, the theory of gravity, or any other theory. He is selective, like in his choice of argument. Now, let us look now at evolution. Gospels as proof of evolution. Why doesn't he agree? We also find in Joshua that the earth is flat and that the earth is the centre of the whole of Israel. That the earth is flat and that the earth is the centre of the whole of Israel. Even Gish, out of the 88 scientific statements in here, he got one right. The earth rotates around the sun. So if you want to have creationism using the Bible, like the Noah's Ark example we heard, then you must be consistent and agree that the earth is flat, or if you go to Kings or Chronicles, that pi is equal to 3, and on we go. The rebuttals that we hear are based on dogma. So if you take out of creationism, if you take out all the misquotes, all the errors, and all the misleading statements, then you've got nothing left. Creationism's got nothing to do with science or nothing to do with truth. Now, why do I come across so firm? I'll tell you why. The parents from Livermore School, from Livermore in California, were Christian parents. And their children were driven to atheism by his writing. That, I think, is something to be upset about. The argument tonight has been between science in toto, which incorporates physics, chemistry, geology, biology, astronomy, all of culture, all of religion, against a fundamentalist organisation who, on public record, have left a lot to be desired. They are in the business of making money not for God but for mammon, and I just help them by purchasing that.
I'm going to have a summary now, I think. We'll just settle for a moment, and then we have 5 minutes to finalise rebuttals, make whatever statements each contestant feels legitimate. Then we will have the question time. I think it's fairly reasonable that all of us understand that for people to get a fair chance at the questions and the answers, we're going to have to maintain some form of order. That could be a little difficult. It's the choice of the meeting whether they want order or chaos. If you want your questions answered, you're going to have to go along with the methods. It's going to take a few moments to get to you with the microphone, to have the question presented, clarified, then answered. We'll be sticking to the 2-minute rule. We'll be sticking to the questions only rule. Now, 5 minutes each. Thank you.
I greatly regret the deteriorating situation we have seen here tonight. Now, you are a witness. My initial presentation, I set a tone that was reasonable, that was at an academic level. I was genuinely, I did not heap any abuse on my distinguished opponent or make any charges of any kind. But Dr. Plimer then set a very different tone to this meeting. It deteriorated into pandemonium, you might say, and abuse and muckraking and all that sort of thing. And we see the result here tonight. I think it's very unfortunate. I don't see why we can't have a reasonable discussion between two men of science who hold different views and different interpretations of the data. I don't know why we can't do that. Why we have to see what we've seen here tonight. Very, very regrettable. And I assure Dr. Plimer, if he ever visited our institute, at San Diego and gave a lecture, he'd be given great respect, and we'd listen quietly and show him respect that a visitor should be shown. Now, he did this little trick of electricity. Look, That's a testable, repeatable, scientific experiment. But I'd like Dr. Plimer, I'd like to ask him what happens when he gets hit by lightning. Now there comes an inpouring of energy. He's an open system. He gets all that energy, gets hit by lightning. Does it become more ordered, more complex? I should say not. He gets obliterated. You see, the input of energy is not sufficient. If you put it into electrical cord and then you plug a machine into it, a machine is made to utilize that electrical energy. But if Dr. Plimer had grabbed the raw ends of those wires, probably would have been killed. Now that's the difference, you see. And he made the experiment for me. I thank you very much, Dr. Plimer, for that fine demonstration. Now, he certainly doesn't know the difference between scientific theories and inferences and so forth. Like Stephen Jay Gould said one time, why, just because we didn't understand the laws of gravity, that doesn't mean that apples don't fall off trees. And just because we don't know the mechanism, that doesn't mean that apes didn't evolve into people. Listen, all of us have seen apples fall off trees, and you can see that happen repeatedly. Have any of you ever seen an ape evolve into man? You see, that's the difference. But they don't seem to recognize the difference between this inference or this imagination and testable scientific theory. Please notice, I describe two mammoth gaps in the fossil record. The gap between microscopic single-cell organisms and the so-called Cambrian explosion. That's not my word, that's the words of standard geologists. The sudden appearance of this great array of very complex creatures supposedly involving hundreds of millions of years of evolution. We ought to have billions and billions and billions of those intermediate. We don't even have one. And then we supposedly have one of those invertebrates evolve into fishes. 100 million years. Billions times billions of those things would have lived and died. We don't have tens of millions, hundreds of millions of their fossils. We don't have one. I challenge Dr. Plimer to explain why that is true. Why do fishes suddenly appear fully formed? Every major kind of fish we know anything about. It's true. There's not a trace of an answer. Dr. Plimer never tried to answer that because he cannot answer. He has no answer. The evidence is very clear. Now, furthermore, just plain, we're in the business of making money. Let me tell you this. Right when we founded the Institute, Dr. Morris and I, the president, we established a policy immediately. We would never accept 1 penny of any honorarium. Any money given to us as speakers would go to the Institute, not to me. Now, Dr. Plimer, if he was over there and he was debating me, the money he would get would go in his pocket. The money I would get would go to the Institute. I don't get any of that money, and I work night after night. I work weekend after weekend, most of my weekends, and I don't get a penny of that money, and I wouldn't take a penny of that money. If I had stayed at the Upjohn Company, I would have retired 2 years ago on a very, very handsome retirement. As it was when I left the Upjohn Company, I lost all of my retirement. I had a company-paid retirement plan. I had a health plan that cost me $1 a month. I had a savings plan for every dollar I put into it. I got 50 cents worth of Upjohn stock. I had all of these benefits, which I lost when I came to the Institute. Talk about money. If I was interested in money, I would stay at the Institute. I'm not really worried about retirement systems. I think the Lord has the best retirement system in the world, or I should say the best retirement system, because it's out of this world. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me just say this once more. I just want you to consider the evidence that we have presented tonight for creation. Consider it reasonably in a cool, calm manner after you've calmed down a bit, and then decide whether there's a reasonable, rational, scientific evidence for creation. Thank you very much.
In the Supreme Court of the United States, evidence was presented by 72 Nobel Prize winners, 17 academies of science, and 7 scientific organisations, and this evidence stated that creationists wish to relabel religion as science, and it is sectarian religious dogma. 72 Nobel Prize winners, 17 academies of science and 7 scientific organisations. This is their evidence, an original of it. These are men and women who are saying we are talking about sectarian religious dogma. Creationism is an attack on religion, it's an attack on culture, and it's an attack on science. That is why I refuse to separate out gravity or which way up rocks are. It is an attack on our whole society. This booklet refers and cites as evidence some of his writings and writings of others, like Snelling and our scientist Setterfield, who has decided to change the speed of light. If one changes the speed of light, that is a magnificent scientific breakthrough. That apparently has been done by creation. So we go to the standard science citation index, look up Barry Setterfield, and the name isn't even there. So it is not science. As these people say, it's religious dogma. Then we go and look at say it's religious dogma. Then we go and look at someone else, say like Michael Archer in the audience. He has 19 citations in the 1986 Science Citation Index. His science is therefore a contribution to humanity. There is a harmony between religion and science. These people and their followers ask 12-year-old school children to choose between creationism and atheism. 300 years ago, Galileo said the Bible teaches us the way to go to heaven, not the way the heavens go. That is still true. Religion and science give us a much fuller picture of the world and ourselves. And again, we can go to the Bible, Proverbs 3:13. Happy is the man that findeth wisdom and the man that getteth understanding. So as a human, you are trying to understand. You try to go back to the source of information. You try to get at harmony with the world in terms of religion, culture, history, science, etc. Charles Darwin was originally a clergyman. He is buried in the Anglican Cathedral, Westminster Abbey. Surely that is the harmony of religion and science. Science never asks you to give up your faith. Creationism demands that you give up common sense. It demands to give up your faith, and it demands to give up your money for mammon. What are we left with? I think my closing statement can only be out of the temple money changer.
Something struck, I don't know whether it's evolution or creation. No, it's going down.
I think we need to thank both men for contributing to a very educational, inspirational evening. It is now 10:05. I consider that's fairly late, particularly after the week we've had. I'm suggesting that we'll take questions till 20 past and then close the meeting. Does that meet with everybody's approval? May I see a show of hands, please? Those that want to take questions through till 1 a.m. Now, a word of explanation. The questions As outlined before, questions only. There will be 2 minutes to answer them. Dr. Gish will take the first question. Due to a slight problem we have with the radio mic, we'll be doing a little experiment as we go to make it work correctly. I need some help to pick out the questions as I'm looking into light, and I am now going to be wandering around the audience. Can I have somebody? Can you see two hands that go up? Yes, can you pick the first one? Well, he was quickest.
Turn on.
Dr. Gish, I was pleased to hear you dissociate yourself from Centerfield's research, or at least carefully distance yourself. Could you explain a paradox that I've always wondered? I should explain that I work on fossils in the Australian Museum, and I work on things of the past. Things of the past I want to ask you about are not on Earth, they're in the sky. When you look at the sky, the magnificent southern sky, in the Milky Way, you see stars, the galaxy. We saw recently a supernova which was dated 170,000 years ago. Given that the speed of light is fixed, and you don't disagree with that apparently, and at the time of creation, on your scale 6,000 years ago, the stars were lit up and begun. Presumably, if that light was on its way from the stars to us, we should be seeing new stars appearing all the time since the galaxy is 250,000 light years across. Now, there are only 2 or 3 explanations of this. One is that the light was created on its way to us as an appearance of age, as Henry Morris said, or that the stars exist in real time and the light is coming to us from enormous distances and enormous times. Now, which version do you have? Is it an appearance of deceit by a creator who's created light on its way to us? Or do the stars actually exist? Do the stars exist? Is it deceit or observable fact?
Well, I'd like to paraphrase the question.
I think I got most of your question. First of all, it would not be deceitful on the part of the Creator if he told us what he did, which he did. That would not be deceit. Because the Bible says God created stars to be for signs and seasons on the earth. If that's the case, we had to see them immediately. That's the only solution I could give, which you suggested. Now, as far as the supernova is concerned, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know enough about the physics of that to understand it. I would have to say this, that what seemed to indicate, if that supernova really did take place 100,000 years ago, and we're only seeing it today, then truly it happened 100,000 years ago. And the universe is not 10,000 years old or 6,000 or 8,000 years old. Let me point out that many creation scientists believe that things are old. And that the age of this universe, age Earth, is not an issue in creation science versus evolution science. Now, I do believe that that is because not only creation science, but conservative Christian theologians take the view that things could be quite old. So it's not an issue here. Now, there are many creation scientists and theologians do believe that things are young. And there are many, may I just point out, and I think this should be the end of the question. I will let Dr. Plimer to comment. But there are many physical processes. I said I did not have an answer to that.
Come on, quiet, please. Well, I only had 2 minutes.
Did I hear something from a gentleman over here? From a gentleman?
Well, just very briefly, we've got a lot of other questions.
Let Dr. Plimer comment. I said this. If that supernova really did take place 100,000 years ago, then the universe must be at least that old. But, okay.
That'll do.
Dr. Gish, I have most of your books. And in your books, you clearly, repeatedly state that the world is very young, 6,000 years. You may stretch it to 8 or 10, but that's the furthest that the creationists will go. Now, I only talked about the backyard of our universe, our galaxy. If we go further to galaxies 10,000, million light years away? It has the same answer.
There's many evidences on both sides of that question. There are creation scientists and Christian theologians who believe that the weight of the evidence indicates that things are very old. There are other creation scientists who believe the weight of evidence indicates that things are probably quite young. There are many similar questions. Let me give you one example. A comet can only exist for a few thousand years.
I'll ask you a question in a minute, Dr. Evolutionist. I've got it all written down here. Could we have a comment on that, please? Hey, did you want to comment on that answer?
I have a question coming from me.
Right, okay. Questions? Dorothy next one, apparently.
I would like to ask Dr. Plimer if he can explain why the major Christian churches, the Jewish churches, reject creation science as a travesty of the Bible. There is no theologian, no scripture scholar who accepts creation science, who does not see this.
And a Christian one of that too.
With all due respect, you're a living fossil.
I think the answer is fairly simple. If you want to start a new business, and let's call it fundamentalist evangelism, you have to get a new angle. Frighten people about the world. Frighten people about the universe. Make it everything safe for people. It's polarised. It's black or it's white. It's created or it's evolved. But don't let them think. Now, if you read your book, you'll learn that when God said, let there be light, God said, let there be light, if you use simple physics, the whole of the world would have become vapor. Bang! So you stop people thinking. That is why the churches, the established churches, are against the fundamentalist evangelist church, because the whole purpose is perverse.
Thank you, Dr. Plimer. I've got a question. The statement that Darwin's philosophy refers to a missing link being still missing. Does that mean that it may not never be found, or that it doesn't exist? Or does it exist, but we just haven't found it?
The fact that these missing links have not been found, well, we've been searching intensely for them for 125, 130 years after Darwin. Most geologists are now beginning to conclude we'll never will find it. And they're trying to invent some theory to get around that difficulty. Why? To explain why we have these huge gaps. Now, we're not going to find those things. We searched every so-called geological formation, geological period around the earth, the bottom of the ocean, everywhere else, and they have not turned up. And the conclusion is they're not going to turn up. Now, you can believe anything you want to, and obviously a lot of people do believe a lot of different things. They're willing to believe anything to deny the possibility of creation. But go ahead and believe it. But it's just a belief. Acknowledge that it's a religious belief. That's okay. I have no objection to that, as long as they're honest about it.
Yes, now that's the gentleman there with the glasses. He wants to ask a question. Firstly, this is a question for Dr. Plimer.
I would like to ask you, why is it that Isaac Newton, who defended Bishop Ussher's chronology of biblical, how the world came to be, conservative chronology of the beginnings of this universe, Isaac Newton was a Christian. Why is it then that Michael Faraday, who gave us the laws of electromagnetism, was a Christian who was a creationist?
Well, what's the question?
The question is,
of the past that you would like to mention? Since then, there have been thousands of scientific discoveries. I gave you the figure for scientific manuscripts submitted over a 4-year period. 135,000. You want science not to have advanced. That's why you think like you do.
I'd like to ask Mr. Gish. I take it he believes in a creationism of a particular religion. Now, I believe that the world is full of many religions, many of whom have their own creation theories. I'd like to ask Dr. Gish what particular creation theory he believes in, and has he done a comparative study of them, and if he has chosen a particular one, why has he chosen that particular one over the others?
The answer to that question is very simple. We want none of these taught in the public schools. We don't want the book of Genesis. We don't want the Navajo Indian version. We don't want the Hindu version. We don't want any of these taught. What we want is the kind of scientific evidence that I presented here tonight. If you are a believing Muslim, an Orthodox Jew, if you are a Christian, if you are a Hindu, no matter what, then the theistic creation model comes within your area, and it can fit and support any kind. I personally accept the Judeo-Christian view. I believe it is the correct one. That's what I accept. And that is on the basis of my faith, just as an atheist has faith, just as an agnostic has faith, just as anyone has faith, and don't kid yourself. Now, Dr. Plimer put his finger on it. He started to lambaste the fundamentalists. Why don't fundamentalist Christians have some rights? Why can't their viewpoints be heard? Why can't the fundamentalist Catholics, the fundamentalist Presbyterians, the fundamentalist Baptists, why don't we have any rights? Why is it only the liberal and the agnostic and the atheist? Right now in the United States, what they say is this: you have 1,000 kids in a school, and if there's one atheist, you can't teach anything that would even hint at the existence of God. You've got to bow down before that one atheist. Now, what's democratic about that? What's right about that? Why can't we teach both? Why can't both these kids hear both sides of this question? What's wrong with that? I'd like to know what's wrong with it.
This gentleman over here.
I would just like to know, and for you to explain to us, how the evolution of the human eye came about and how you explain the complexity in it.
My arguments tonight have been on the beauty of science. And in science, if we do not understand something, we go looking. And we don't have a blind, unreasoning faith. We don't say, because I have enjoyed cranial contraction, therefore it's creation.
I'll introduce three-armed God evolution. We also got physical God of the whole and everything in order of example. I haven't been given one of the evidence for creation tonight. Can you give me one, please?
But if I understood the question correctly, it was to give her one evidence for creation. Is that what she said? That question?
What is the one?
Positive evidence for creation? Is that what you're asking for? One positive evidence for creation.
That is correct.
All right, okay. Forget about evolution. Forget it. Nobody ever thought about evolution. We're all creationists. Now we ask ourselves, we're going to go out and we're going to dig up the fossils. What would we expect to find? We would expect to find the abrupt appearance of each basic type of creature without transition forms and without ancestors. That is what we do find, and I submit that as positive, powerful evidence for creation.
This idea is evolved. Michael Archer here, thank you for
Gish for quoting my book out of context. I was delighted to demonstrate exactly some of the things that Professor Plimer has said that creationists do. I'll talk to you about that after a while. But of course, right next to the page in which we talked about the fossil record of elements that is punctuated equilibrium, there was, of course, the thing that you didn't cite, which was the graduate evolutionist fossil record of the adaptable primate. But could I just, I'll give you a choice. You've asked for me. Could I give you a choice to discuss the significance of Pichia or probatic nature, Pichia between invertebrates and vertebrates, and probatic nature between reptiles and mammals?
The question. It's difficult for me to understand the question. That's my problem.
Yes, I'm sorry about that. Can you understand me now?
I'm hearing you well right now. Yes.
I've sort of given you a choice. Could you discuss why you think Pichia, for example, is not a structural intermediate and a temporal intermediate?
What is not? What is not?
Pichia gracilens. I'm sure you know about the fossil record. Pichia gracilens. It's a late Cambrian cephalochordate.
The late Cambrian? You mean in the Ediacaran?
No, it's in the Burgess shale.
And that's not late pre-Cambrian. That's middle Cambrian. That's middle Cambrian. The Burgess shale is middle Cambrian, right?
I didn't say pre-Cambrian. I said Cambrian.
Middle Cambrian.
Okay. I'd like you to consider why Pichia gracilens is not a structural intermediate and a temporal intermediate between invertebrates and vertebrates, or why Probenignathus in the Triassic is not a structural intermediate between reptiles and mammals.
What was the last one you mentioned?
Probenignathus jensenii.
Probenignathus. All right, I'd be glad to answer that. I wish I had my notes handy here. Tom Kemp, let me address this problem about the mammal-like reptile. And here's another thing. You see, what people want to do is try to drag us into an argument about this. All right, now let's be fair about this. I pointed out the immense gap where there is no argument, where there is no discussion, where these invertebrates do all appear fully formed, and there's no question that they do. And there's hundreds and hundreds of millions of years gap there. There's 100 million year gap between the invertebrates and the vertebrates, and no ichthyologist who knows anything about it would claim to have any ancestors for fishes, none whatsoever. You're talking about something found in the middle Cambrian, and it's not an intermediate between anything. Is it soft-bodied? It's soft-bodied. All right, what is it evolving into? Is it evolving into a clam or a snail or a trilobite? It doesn't have any hard parts. Of course it doesn't. Do you mean to tell me a simple soft-bodied form evolved directly into an animal with hard parts?
Dr. Gish, could I just ask you, do you know what a cephalochordate is?
Dr. Simpson himself said that was ridiculous because the anatomy of a simple soft-bodied creature is totally different in anatomy than invertebrate has hard parts, because the soft anatomy, listen, the soft anatomy of an animal with hard parts is intimately integrated with those hard parts. And if a soft-bodied form evolved into a creature with hard parts, did it do it overnight? Would it have some transition form? There are none. You don't have any transition forms.
Dr. Gish, you are over time.
I think it's relevant to the scientific information. One, I've seen pictures of dinosaur eggs, and I imagine that the dinosaurs that come out of them wouldn't be very big. You can carry a dinosaur egg in your hand fairly easily, I imagine. Why would it be so difficult for one of those to fit on the ark? Secondly, you use the formula E equals mc squared, where E is the amount of energy derived from that expression, m is the mass, c is the speed of light. Now, I'm sure you well know, as any high school boy who's studied physics,
that only applies to nucleotide reactions where the mass is totally converted to energy, where there's no, that is exactly that mass is converted exactly to energy. That has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with chemical reactions as go on in burning fires, to my knowledge. So do you respond to that?
Yes, running around after a year. The second part of your question is you are quite wrong in elementary physics. You are converting wood into gas. It is a very simple reaction. Even if you only burn a fraction of the wood, you still have a factor of 40 billion times to consider. Now, I don't care whether you burn a little sliver of the wood, the reaction still applies.
Now, I don't call this a debate. Just be quiet for a minute. This is not a debate. This is something which started out as a presentation of what is classified as a science by a creation specialist, and it was deliberately attacked for various reasons by the second speaker. He didn't address his remarks at all to the question, in my opinion, and I'd give him 9 out of 10 for that. However, in his attempted rebuttal, Dr. Plimer did come around to what perhaps is the real issue, and that is how does evolution explain, I suppose, really when it says origins, the origin of the universe, for instance. Now, from a philosophical point of view, no one can explain the origin of the universe. You can study arts or law, or as I have, and they won't get up there and say, well, you know, before the theory of negligence, God did this. All right, I won't be long. God doesn't come into law very much. So I don't think that Dr. Plimer stuck to the point at all. I think Dr. Gish did attempt to give some sort of explanation as to how the universe came to be. And of course, he said he wasn't quoting Genesis, he was going to give a scientific explanation. But it would appear, from what I understood him to say, that other than certain examples, which apparently we can all see with our own eyes, the real guts of the creationist argument is based on the first 2 chapters of Genesis, which are there for anyone to read, and I suggest if you haven't read them, you should, because that will give you some understanding of what apparently is the basis of the creationist argument. From a scientific point of view, I don't know why we can give either speaker a terribly high mark, and I don't think they produce all that much information which backs up either theory. So really it's just a matter for you to decide for yourselves. As long as, I think Dr. Plimer summarised it pretty accurately, as long as it's, and it's a serious matter, let's face it, as long as it's a step forward. And of course that's what all science, and being a scientist, Dr. Plimer will take that attitude. All science should be for not only for the betterment of mankind, although I don't think the bomb would be, but it certainly is supposed to be progress and progressive. And his attack, of course, was that creationist is not progressive. And that's something that you have to decide is an attempt to teach something which basically it would appear to be biblically based in the schools as a science, as a creation science. And it would appear that that's something really, from what I can see here tonight, that everybody must make a decision on. But certainly creation science is not taught in our schools, and but the Bible is. So is that sufficient? So, that's what I
The fool has said, in his heart there is no God. They are corrupt, they have done abominable works. There is none that doeth good. The fool has said, said in his heart there is no God. God tells us what to do. Some obey, some resist. The fool says in his heart that God does not exist. This is how the foolish justify the evil they have done. It takes a fool to say there is no God. Psalm 14.